Hey, Star Pals, and welcome to your March 2025 month ahead forecast. I'm Lindsay Turner, and my co host is Sarah Knowles. Sarah, great to see you as always.
New Zealand.
How has February been for you?
Like, I don't even like asking people this question, like, "How's your
Yeah.
February?" Um, the intensity of the news cycle and, you and I have talked about, like, just things going on in our own, like, local circles and relationships. The intensity feels, like, really extreme right now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we were talking in preparation for this, like, I feel a little overwhelmed even doing the retrospect of the month. Like, okay, where did we see the transits line up with the news and like the things that are going on in our world? It's like, it felt overwhelming to even try to parse all of that out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. And it really gets to, what we were talking about with the kind of flooding and all of this water energy that colored the month of February. The joke that I've been telling people is that I am a great catastrophizer, but I think I almost under catastrophized February, and the Mars, slowdown to station, and also the Neptune on the North Node. I think I just did not quite ken how intense this was gonna feel, and that's sort of like it's all just kind of muddy.
Yeah.
The shock and awe campaign that is being, you know, completed against us by the government. And this kind of really slow Mars Saturn trine that we've been having. It's all just so like we're just
Mhm.
in it, right?
Yeah, literally the playbook that the administration is working under is calling the approach flood the zone. Literally, they're calling it flooding the zone.
I did
So
not know that. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
it just that kind of intentional deluge of so much catastrophe that we might call like it's just it feels like so much martially coming at us is like
Oh,
we can see the correlation in a Mars station in fall in its water sign, trine Saturn in its water sign. Like that feels like flood the zone, really.
yeah. I have been learning so many painful lessons about Mars and Cancer, which is a placement you have natally we've talked about before. I've at least been complaining about this a lot on Instagram that this station's happening right on top of my natal Sun-Mars opposition. So I have Sun at 17 Cancer and Mars at 17 Capricorn, um and, I've been through some heartbreak this month, which was really surprising and out of nowhere, and it's teaching me a lot about this mixing of, like, autonomy and nurture, and how do we strike a balance between those 2 needs, in our own lives and in our communities. It's, like, been very, very challenging, to think about what is it that I need to do for me and what is it that I need to do for others? And then, of course, we are seeing this on a really global, national scale as well.
We're experiencing in different ways, like what Mars can do that can feel like just purely destructive in the areas that we think of as Cancerian. And then also how sometimes, we always have to be really careful, like theologically and spiritually, how we talk about this, but how sometimes Mars comes through ambitiously to sever and change and burn some things that we were really attached to. And sometimes in the wake of that, we do kind of get some new insight about how we want to do things differently. I never want to communicate like suffering is redemptive, but it is up to us sometimes when Mars sweeps through our homes and our attachments. It is up to us, like, what do I want to do with this, like, reality that's been handed to me? If we believe
Totally.
in fate and fortune, like, what we do with it is really where our agency can kick in really powerful ways.
Absolutely. It's so much about our response to our own suffering and the suffering around us. And I think you're right to be careful. It's profane to have gratitude for suffering. For me, in these periods of like really deep grief, whether it's on a personal level or a communal level, and often the two are intertwined,
Mm,
almost always. There's a jewel in grief, I think, and the
mm,
jewel is that you A, get to learn a lot about yourself and your own resilience, and B, about what really matters to you,
mm,
and about the kind of life that you want to live going forward after these lessons. And so I think if there's a gift to look for in all of this difficulty, in all of this, I mean, quite frankly, sinful, like systemic shit that is going down right now. I saw, God, just yesterday that the White House posted an ASMR video of people being chained up and sent to detention. I mean, of Latino people being chained up and sent to detention, to be specific. And um I just my first thought was like, repent, like fucking repent. This
mm,
is so disgusting and so sinful. Not only the action itself, but the morbid
mhm,
celebration of it. Um, and you know, that none of that is a gift. It's all horrible and profane, but I think there's an opportunity for us to get in touch with our humanity and to decide how we want to be going forward, and what we are willing to um, what price we are willing to pay, or not, for our own humanity and for the
mhm.
humanity of others. So yeah, it's a difficult time, and for folks listening, we're going to connect all this to scripture toward the end of our time. Do you want to jump into what March has in store for us, Sarah? You have any more
Yeah,
reflections
let's
on
do.
February? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are kind of tired of hearing about it at this point.
There's definitely plenty to talk about, that work that's coming up as well, so I'm
Yeah.
okay transitioning.
Yeah, beautiful. So, um, just in keeping with Mars retrograde, so we're recording this at the end of February. Mars is about to station direct on February 23rd on Sunday. So, by the time most people are listening to this, it will already have gone direct. And this is at the degree marker of 17 Cancer. So, if you have any planets or angles around 17 degrees of the cardinal signs, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, Aries, you might especially be feeling this station. And a station just basically means that a planet, apparent to us, the planets don't slow down or stop and reverse on their own. But in our apparent perception of the planets, is Mars is just kind of parked at one point in the sky and is going to slowly start moving forward through the zodiac again. And this just has to do with the orbital patterns that we have alongside Mars. In our solar systems, I would typically celebrate a Mars station, and I think it is good that we're kind of moving forward with the new strategy, the new assignment. Um, but I think what's really important to note is that Mars stays at the 17-degree marker until I think March 9th. So it's slow, right? We're still in it for a while. We're in this territory. Sarah, what would you add about Mars going direct?
So for people who've been keeping track of like Mars through Leo and Cancer and where Mars got to in Leo before turning retrograde, sometimes retrograde cycles give us this opportunity to revisit, relearn, revise the things that are either happening in the place where Mars is doing the retrograde cycle or our houses in our chart that are ruled by Mars. So like what's happening in the
Yeah,
Scorpio and Aries parts of our chart.
totally.
I think when we come to the direct station, particularly this long, it feels very ominous to me for Mars to stay in one place for so long. It really does give us an opportunity to carve out some time between the 23rd and the 9th or whenever that's inching forward starts to take place. Like, what am I being invited to relearn here? Whether it's in our Aries Scorpio area or our Cancer Leo area. Like, what am I being invited to revisit? Themes of my life that keep coming up, sagas that I find myself in. Um, w-
Sagas.
yeah.
I'm not privy to any sagas.
Oh, you're saga free. But for the rest of us, there are some sagas. And so for me, it's like, okay, next time I come to this particular kind of crossroads, um, how do I think I want to approach this differently? I think a long station gives you just that much more time to do some of that. Now, I think once the direct motion starts happening, sometimes things are revealed that change what you feel like that lesson was, and so we're prepared for that. It's not like your homework and then everything just like goes according to your plan. In my experience, that's not the case. But I think the reflection before Mars traverses through all of that territory where all of this like digging up and resurfacing of things happens, I think that reflection can be a good use of time.
Yeah, totally. I think strategy and re-strategizing have really been my keywords for
Mhm.
Mars during this cycle. In nonviolent communication, in this needs-based model, right? We talk a lot about we have all these needs. Everyone has the same basic needs, but what differs is our strategies for how to get those needs met. And if we get overly attached to our strategies, right? If they're not working for us, or if they're not
Mhm.
kind of firing on all levels, maybe on some but not on others, if we get overly attached to them, then we find that we have a chronic unmet need. And so, if we're able to tune into what are the strategies that I've been employing that really don't work to get my needs met anymore, I think this is a great time to be thinking about, as you have alluded to, right? What strategies, what are the new strategies that I'm going to move forward and try something different, right? So
I
we're
love
seeing this
that.
on a political and personal level for sure.
I was
Yeah,
thinking as you were saying that, particularly cancer, needs and feelings, like the feelings that we have are sometimes the signal that the need has been met or unmet.
totally.
Um, Needs and feelings are so lunar. I was thinking about like our humanity and our changing needs and feelings. That feels so lunar to me. So for Mars to be there in Cancer feels like this, yeah, like what you're saying, like this really cool opportunity to be like, okay, how have these things that I have trusted for so long not worked? In what kind of redistribution of energy and effort do I want to do here?
Yeah. I I love this on a political level as we are experiencing a fascist takeover of our government. I don't even know how I would mince words about that, but I've seen a lot of people are talking about like we've seen this strategy before. This doesn't work, right? I think I saw a speech from the governor of Illinois
Yeah.
saying like what happens when trans people and queer people and women and Latino people and black people and other minorities like are what, arrested, locked up, killed, right? What are we left with? Like, fascism is not a strategy that works to get our needs met. I've been deep in study on nonviolent communication recently, and just um, there is this concept that we can all get our needs met. We can all get all of our needs met. That's actually possible. And I think that's a very Cancerian ideal for sure.
I
For
do
sure.
too.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, um, we have to keep in mind that this month we have a lot of stuff happening in Aries, and all of it is being ruled by Mars in the sign of its fall in Cancer. So that sort of adds to the ugly of it, I will say, and the real tenderness. But I think that that's really important to keep in mind that this month, a lot of what's going on is involving planets that are in the signs of their exile or the signs of their fall. There's a lot of debilitated planets, and what I wrote about in my newsletter for Pisces season was that to me all of this debilitation is really like the buck stops here kind of thing. Like there's nowhere else to pass the responsibility on
Mm.
to. And I think that we're at a political, communal, and most likely personal moments where the responsibility has landed with us. And for a lot of us, that may be a new experience in some ways of not really having the option to just tune out or unplug, or if you do, it's at the cost of your humanity. So that's really how I'm thinking about all these planets in debility this month.
Yeah. It's a really good image of planets in detriment and fall can't find their resources. They can't reach their comrades. And that does feel like a powerful, tragic reflection of what a lot of us are facing personally and
Y-
collectively.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the invitation I think is really digging deep into our sense of resilience and into what we know is true and good and holy and right. And yeah, to just go for it, because when the chips are down, we'll talk about this with our scripture. When the chips are down, it's gonna be a lot easier to sell out.
Yeah.
Um, Wonderful. Shall we move to Venus retrograde? So, do you want to tell us a little bit about the details of this Venus retrograde, Sarah?
Sure. Venus entered Aries at the beginning of February. So that ingress, I mean, Venus enters Aries into its detriment. So the transition for Venus from Pisces exaltation to Aries detriment is a jarring
Rough.
transition.
It was
Really
rough.
jarring. Yeah. And for those of us who have, yeah, who are particularly Venusian, I think feeling that kind of feels like going from, like, a vacation to, like, a major
Warzone.
shit storm. Yeah, exactly.
Which is literally what I did during that transit. I
Literally on
literally
the
went from
day.
being on vacation to leaving early to coming home to a shitstorm.
So, Venus, traveling through this sign of detriment will then station retrograde on the 1st of March. So
We're just
we
starting off
actually
strong.
begin the month with not only with this Mars cycle that we've been talking about is already playing out in the background in a station, in a powerful station at the midpoint of this retrograde, but now Venus um, is starting her own retrograde cycle, stationing retrograde at 10 degrees of Aries. So again, watching your cardinal placements there and just a few degrees earlier in the sign for Venus. And then we'll talk about Mercury traveling kind of alongside and with Mercury, sort of in parallel, back into Pisces before turning direct again and coming back. So that's kind
Yes.
of what we're looking at for March and Venus.
Yes. And you might be thinking, well, Venus back into Pisces, that's great. That's like her exaltation. Except for womp womp, that is where Saturn is parked right now in late Pisces. And so she is going to come into very close contact. Actually, we get a conjunction with Saturn before she stations direct. And then when she stations direct, another quick conjunction. So she's really stationing very close to Saturn within, I think, a degree or two. And so it there's a pall over
Mm.
over her exaltation, especially still with the kind of North Node energy going on in late Pisces, and Neptune at the very, very final degree for the entire month of March, the very final minutes, we should say, of Pisces. So it's when she's in detriment in Aries, she's being ruled by Mars in fall. When she's exalted in Pisces, she's co-present with the North Node Neptune and Saturn. And it's just quite a lot. The last time we had this retrograde was in 2017. The Venus cycle is 8 years long, and so that was under the last inauguration of Trump. We had the Women's March, we had the Me Too movement. So I think Venus in Aries is a lot of femmes fight back, right?
Yeah.
Queer people, trans people, women. These are all folks signified by Venus, people who are basically, for their gender or sexual orientation, maligned by systems, would be represented by Venus in the sign of her detriment. And so I think that we are going to see, of course, a lot of ongoing um, resistance to whatever is happening in the political machine. Um, and yeah, I'm wondering, Sarah, if you have any thoughts on what we might expect or look for in our own worlds with this Venus retrograde, maybe on a more personal level as well as political.
The past year, you and I have worked with images around Venus Saturn aspects. We've worked with images of like flowers at a funeral, like the most beautiful flowers, but you're at a funeral. And I wonder what that might be like to have this kind of pretty debilitated 19 benefic rolling up to what feels like a really heavy place in late Pisces. And exalted, even though ruled by detrimented Jupiter, like what might how might Venus be showing up with flowers even in a really sad situation? I wonder what that might feel like. How does war make us appreciate small, beautiful moments, small, beautiful things? I don't know if Venus going in and out of the war zone might have a great appreciation for like simple beauties or moments of love, random acts of kindness, like those kinds of things. And perhaps this will teach us something about that kind of appreciation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just kind of flashing back to the image of the jewel fountain grief feels very Venus Saturn. And, you know, the last decan of Pisces, the last 10 degrees of Pisces is also the last 10 degrees of the whole zodiac. And that decan is ruled by Mars in a sign ruled by Jupiter. So we get both of the, I always think of the song Closing Time. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. And the kind of nostalgia and sense of loss, but also sense of hope that comes with these final degrees of Pisces, where all these planets are going to be hanging out for the next good while, all of March. What are we mourning and what has been fulfilled? What did we strive for that didn't come to pass? What are we aiming for that we hope will come to pass in whatever new era we're moving into next?
Yeah, that's really beautiful actually to think about this benefic kind of hovering at that really critical place of endings and beginnings. And I'm thinking particularly about our eclipses coming up, like endings and beginnings are such a theme of this month. Anytime we're in the Pisces Aries area, but then also to have eclipses on top of that feels like, woo, I bet a lot of things feel like, and I can think about this for the country that you and I live in, and some things that happen in our relationships and communities. Like there's a lot of beginnings and endings happening right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel it on such a personal level too. And um, we'll talk about Neptune. Well, maybe we'll just do a quick mention because I actually don't want to spend a lot of time on Neptune into Aries because it's like something that really you could do a whole workshop around. But I do think that we are at uh, this really big threshold moment with Neptune about to move into Aries, which does happen this month on the very one of second to last day of March 30th. Or wait, or just 30 days, half September. You did
31.
okay, thank you. Second to the penultimate day of
Hmm.
March, Neptune moves into Aries, and so this is a huge transit. I mean, Neptune has been in Pisces for what, 16 years, I believe. And it is going to move in and out
Yeah.
of Aries Pisces over the next year when it stations retrograde. But this is the first ingress of
Yeah.
Neptune into Aries in our lifetimes. And so I think it's, yeah, something really, I mean, spiritually, but just existentially, I think we are really moving into a new era. Um, I I can think of at least one thing going on in your life that is feeling like the end of an era and the beginning of a new era. For me, it's feeling that way, although it's harder to put my finger on exactly what it's going to look like. But yeah, there's some really big changes coming up this
Mhm.
year. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Neptune in Aries is marked by war and by violent kind of ideals that turn violent. And so,
Zeal, right?
yeah. And so It is with trepidation that a lot of us as astrologers are kind of going into this transit and certainly watching the global and for us in the US national backdrop. But lots of countries are going through very similar dynamic transitions as ours. It feels very ripe for a repeat of the pattern that we've seen as we've traced it back through the ages. I was just reading, somebody was talking about the temple destruction in the revolt in Jerusalem in the late 60s was a Neptune and Aries transit as well. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like even that, like watching what's happening in Israel, Gaza, Palestine right now, and thinking about that kind of like what other kind of violent ideal may take hold or find even a new expression after the last just over a year that we've been seeing this particular chapter of that
Yeah.
constantly violent cycle.
It's wild too. I can't remember if it was Abu Mashar that I was reading or Vedius Valens, one of these old dead astrologers talking about that land, that geography being very much associated with the sign of Aries. And of course, we've really seen a pinnacle of the violence there under the Aries Libra eclipses.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think I'm hoping that there's at least a large enough section of the population that can find their access to zeal without violence,
Mm.
and that we can enter a new era of how do we do Aries without being violent, right? Because it signifies all that stuff, right? Like violence and war kind of belongs to the sign of Aries, but I think also finding our way around those things, unlearning those things, finding new ways around conflict. It could be Aries territory for sure. So that's that's my prayer for the world, for this, for the next decade plus long transit of Neptune and Aries.
Maybe particularly ruled by Mars and the moon's fine. Maybe there's some here we are again talking about kind of rough things being hopeful, but maybe Mars in fall in this station in this retrograde, like so much power built up here. Mars in Cancer, what I feel from it is it longs for something different.
Mhm.
And I wonder what effect that might have
Yeah.
on the transits ahead.
Yeah. I mean, my intuition is that the whole world really would rather have a nap than a fight. Yeah. Like the majority of folks are just fucking tired and ready to do something a different way. So, um, yeah, I pray that we find a different way with this. So we did skip over Mercury retrograde. That starts on March 15th. It stations at 9 degrees Aries. So what's really important too is that we are having our final eclipse in Aries at 9 degrees of Aries. And so these Venus and Mars stations are really right on that area of the chart. They may be like a prelude to the eclipse. So notice what's going on when Venus stations, when Mercury stations, what's going on, because it may signal more activity later when we have the Aries eclipse, which is is that the 29th?
Yes.
Yes, the 29th. So the day before Neptune moves into Aries. Yeah, the Aries sector is, woof, it is hot. So we have a Mercury retrograde, which is it's our most common retrograde cycle. Starts on March 15th, goes to April 7th, from 9 degrees Aries to 26 degrees Pisces. And what I've been thinking about is, Mercury retrogrades really, I think, cause us to think differently, and to even revisit our own like cognition about things. And I'm just wondering if we're all going to have a collective moment of like, how did this happen so fast? We're going too fast. We need to slow down, that sort of thing, because Mercury in Aries is like a race car, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
whoop. that mixing with that martial energy, that fire energy, like a hot rod even. And on a personal level, maybe like, ooh, was I a bit too rash in this decision? Did I move too quickly? Did I, not take my time? And now what do I have to do to kind of repair for that? That's kind of what's on my mind for this upcoming retrograde. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, similar. I mean, uh, because Mercury does its retrograde cycle through the same element, I think this whole aspect of like Mercury and fire in general is there's like even this kind of wider revisiting theme. So like in the areas of your chart that are fire signs,
Hmm.
Mercury is asking you to think differently, to articulate what you think differently, to like re-examine those things. And so yeah, for I think um that's a big I think it's kind of cool, but it's a big theme, that we get to kind of look at in terms of like Leo, Sagittarius, and Aries and all of our placements there. How do we think and communicate about
Hmm.
those things? How do we get from one place to another about those things in our lives?
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. So at the very end of the month, actually the day of our second eclipse, Mercury egresses Aries and ingresses back into Pisces. So um we that's when we're gonna have that. And the I don't think we mentioned the 27th is when Venus egresses from Aries and ingresses Pisces. So we have this, they're just 2 days apart. They really are, the two of them are lockstep. So
They really
um
are. Yeah.
so I think that that can signal to us too that there is going to be a mixing of signifying events around both of those planets. So, if you're a little more advanced in your practice, you can also be looking at the Venusian and Mercurial signs in your chart and
Yeah.
thinking about what's going on in the houses that those signs occupy. So looking at Taurus, looking at Libra, looking at Virgo, looking at Gemini, and just seeing like what is really happening in those areas of life for you. And just saying that, I'm already like, oh yeah, I can kind of see what's
Yeah.
unfolding in those, like how those four signs are collaborating in my own chart. So that's something to be thinking about as well. um Anything else about Mercury retrograde, Sarah, you want to add?
I mean, it's kind of funky that we're going to end March with Venus and Mercury back into Pisces, and then we'll spend April kind of getting them back to Aries. So I
Hmm.
think of March and April for Venus and Mercury as like going back to get ready to go forward again. And so, yeah, when we come back together and talk about April, we'll talk about picking these planets up where we drop them off kind of back in Pisces. So, yeah, just think about March as kind of a backwards um
Reversal.
looking in the rear view for our values and our love and our connections and how we talk about them and think about them.
Totally. Yeah, it's a time for undoing. uh
Yeah.
Terrifyingly so, as we are watching so many of our institutions and laws being just undone, just
Yeah.
people, jobs just being discarded. So yeah, it is a time of great undoing, and I do feel concerned about that. And I hope that there can be some undoing of unhealthy practices and systems as well in this time. So let us pray, right?
Yeah, that's actually really wise that like sometimes we have to go backwards to like fix things that we did that were not good. Like retrogrades are also opportunities to go back and untie the knots. So maybe this can be a part of that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Let's move into eclipse season. My goodness. This is, I think, the last major movement of this month that we're going to talk about. We've discussed Mars just starting to move forward in Cancer, Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde, Neptune into Aries. So we have a 2-week eclipse season, as eclipse seasons are. And you may also want to treat the weeks on either side of the eclipses. So really starting around March 7th and really ending around what, like April 5th or so.
Hmm.
We might categorize as eclipse season. There is a month where we are going to be experiencing major endings or beginnings, or the events that trigger major endings or major beginnings, maybe at some point in the future for us. I often think of and describe eclipses as when you go to see a play or a musical or an opera or something like that, and the first act ends, and the lights go out, the curtains go down, and then you have your little intermission, and then you come back and you're just in an entirely new place. There is new scenery, the plot, something has kind of happened in that space of the intermission that it happens almost in a vacuum, and suddenly you're just in a new place and time when you come back into the show. And as a drama nerd, as a theater kid, a former theater kid, and maybe current theater kid, that is my favorite metaphor for eclipses. You kind of go into it in one place and you leave it in an entirely different place. What's your personal experience of eclipses, Sarah? Are there any kind of images that you like to use or think of?
I like your image of the stage quite a bit. But yeah, I think of like anytime you get these I feel like you get these like portals of revelation that sometimes
Mhm.
you don't know what to do with, like a dream that you have that like just drops in. You weren't asking for it, you weren't praying for it, you weren't waiting for it, but suddenly this like download of some major new reality. Or often, and we talk about beginnings and endings with eclipses, sometimes also like an abrupt ending of something that I didn't think was over, like I didn't think it was going to end, is also just as suddenly kind of that portal feeling like, oh, I
Mm.
see now what this story was about, but I couldn't have seen that before the eclipse kind of made that
Yeah.
revelation to me.
Yeah. I love that. Yes, just portals, wormholes,
Yeah.
intermissions, right? Like these just moments of being transported from one place
Yeah.
to another. And so there is a very chaotic quality to eclipses, to look out for. And often they mark really positive things, and often they mark really horrific, awful things. So it's a mixed bag for sure. And
Mhm.
what's interesting about this particular eclipse season is that we have just our second of actually what will be 7 eclipses in the Pisces Virgo axis, and those will be going until the late winter of 2027. And then we have our final eclipse in Aries, in the Aries Libra axis. Okay, so we begin with our full moon eclipse in Virgo, and this is the lunar eclipse, right? At 23 degrees of Virgo. And what is, I think we were looking at this chart, and there are a few very notable aspects that this eclipse is making in the zodiac. One is within, gosh, even less than half a degree conjunction of the sun to Saturn, or an opposition of the moon to Saturn. Saturn's at 22 degrees Pisces. Um, and then we also have a very tight sextile to Uranus in Taurus, at 24 degrees Taurus. And then, of course, this kind of ongoing, lingering trine, to Mars at 18 degrees, which is just, or sextile to the moon, at 18 degrees Cancer. And um, yeah, Sarah, what would you like to add, to this, to the interpretation of this chart?
Um, yeah, it looks like of all the eclipse charts that we've studied and worked with, I think there's something about Saturn and Neptune being so close to what's happening here in the Pisces Virgo axis that it feels like it might be hard to know what the insight is. Like it might be hard to feel the revelation of this eclipse.
Mm.
We'll see if that's true, Like we'll see if that's true, but like just how Neptunian it kind of feels and Saturnian, I just wonder if it might I wonder if it will feel like the jolt, the like lightning, those kind of flashing kind of revelations. It looks to me like it might not feel like that. It might feel like something a little more confusing and a little more somber. So
Uh,
that's something that I'm noticing too. And also that Jupiter is detrimented, I guess. So I think that always impacts the eclipse as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've got the ruler of the sun in detriment, right? And the ruler of the moon stationing retrograde.
Yeah.
Like really slowing down to change directions just the very next day. And so there is a standstill quality to this. Um,
Mm,
it's a lot. It's funny you use the word jolt because it's sort of like electricity and water is sort of
mm,
the vibe that I'm getting here, like, water is such a scary and incredible conductor of electricity and, um, just this, like a foggy lightning storm or like, bless you, like being in a body of water, being in the pool or the ocean during a lightning storm, like, it's like, "Oh, get the fuck out," you know? Oof, yeah, it's dicey.
and
Um,
like we've been talking about, there's not much help here, like, our benefics are not in good shape, and they're not particularly accessible, so it just looks kind of dark.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. My advice to people during eclipse seasons is to take on as little as possible, actually. I think it's a time where really deep rest is needed and, a sort of measure of, like, self-preservation is needed during eclipses, so particularly if you have placements, around this 23-degree point in the mutables in Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, or Sag, mm, might be a good time to take a breather for a couple of weeks. Yeah, but, also sometimes life just happens and you find yourself doing things that are really important, during eclipse season, and that may also be part of the story as well.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot over the years, but, like, expecting the unexpected doesn't make the unexpected easier necessarily, but it does make it a little more like, "Okay, I can more quickly probably integrate the reality of what I am finding out," in contrast to being like, "I wasn't planning on this, like, I didn't know this was gonna happen." So,
Mhm.
I often just tell people in my life that I'm close to who aren't necessarily astrologers, who aren't necessarily interested in a lot of astrology, like, "This may be a time to just expect the unexpected."
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of like just have your toolkit ready, right? Like it's like having a well-stocked first aid kit or,
Mhm.
having some extra food and blankets in your car in case you get stranded or uh, uh, just to prepare for, being under-resourced in a surprised way. If you can try to resource yourself a little bit beforehand, you might be able to weather the surprises a bit better. Yeah. So, are we ready to look at our March 29th lunation? So, this eclipse is at 9 degrees on the nose of Aries. And as I said, this is our final eclipse in this sign for about the next 9 years. So, um, for folks who have Libra Aries stuff, prominent Libra Aries stuff, there's maybe a bit of relief here, although the retrogrades are going to be doing their work, and of course we're going to get Saturn and Neptune into Aries this year. So, no big promises.
No real relief for Aries, actually.
I mean, but you know what? Of any sign in the zodiac that can just fucking push through, it's Aries, right? It's the fighter. So this eclipse still being ruled by Mars in Cancer. It's kind of a weird one. I don't know. It's not making any aspects to Saturn or to Venus. It's making a kind of loose square to its ruler. And probably what like the tightest aspect is going to be the sextile to Jupiter in detriment and exile, right? So I don't know. It's kind of like, well, at least we have the gossip, at least we have the drama. That's the like it makes for a good story.
Yeah. Yeah, we might be able to feel busy, doing whatever it is that we need to do during this time. But yeah, I mean, the pileup of everything in Pisces and Aries here,
Yeah, look at it.
everything that's
28
in
degrees
Pisces.
Pisces, 29 degrees
Yeah,
Pisces, 0 degrees Aries. Like by degree, we have a super tight conjunction between Venus, Neptune, and Mercury.
that's what I'm that's what I'm paying attention to is like, I think, the way that I work with astrology, I think of what's in Pisces as mostly inaccessible to what's in Aries. And so there's so much there, but you can't, it's like on the other side of the door, you can't get to it. And there's just kind of these vast open looking spaces around the rest of the chart, other than the Mars and Mole and the detrimented Jupiter. And just like, wow, this is fucking rough, dude. I mean, yeah.
It is. And we've talked about Mercury and Neptune are kind of like swapping kind of overnight,
Yes,
basically,
they do kind of
positions.
pass over each other. Yeah.
And it's this weird, like, when you are going through two people are trying to go through a doorway, right? Like, I
Oh
love
my
that
gosh,
doorway
yes, so
image.
awkward.
It's so awkward. It's so like, "Oh, I'm going," like, "Sorry." But there's this weird, like, you're both on the threshold at the same time, so I'm kind of thinking of that on a symbolic level of, transition, total like, just a really big transitional moment. So I think, a lot of stuff in March is just building to the end of March, right?
Yeah.
Of this Neptune ingress, which is a big fucking deal. This last, the ultimate eclipse in Aries Libra, like just the last one. And then, the following month we're going to get a full moon in this axis that isn't an eclipse. Um, but yeah, it's weird. It's a weird threshold moment for sure. For sure.
And and like we were saying earlier, it's not just any threshold. I don't know how you feel about this, but like I don't think of every transition between signs as the same or like the
No.
similar level. I mean, this one it's not just any transition. It's like Pisces to Aries is jarring to me. So it's also the doorway and the scooching past each other, these multiple retrograde cycles, this eclipse stuff. It's also like extra fraught for me because Pisces and Aries just are so different. They represent beginning and end, and I don't know.
It's
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 intense.
huge.
Yeah.
It's really huge. We've got a planet at the final minutes of the zodiac and a planet at the very first minutes of the zodiac. And if you think of Mercury as this little kid, right? Like just kind of trickster, right? And then you this like big burly Neptune, god of the sea, right? All our delusions and our fantasies, and I can almost imagine like a live action of this exchange of Neptune not even really noticing, Mercury kind of like slipping by, like Neptune's kind of leaving his castle or whatnot, and Mercury's like going back in
Mm.
to get something or to go meet up with Venus, or there's still stuff going on back there. So perhaps there's a quality of around this time of the month of just something happening kind of undercover that's just kind of slipping in, um like while a huge change is happening. I don't know. It's curious.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, big ass month in the Christian world, right? In the Christian calendar, we have this strange season of Lent. We start Lent on March 5th, which is Ash Wednesday, and then we go, through Holy Week and up until Easter. And Sarah, I'm wondering how you are thinking of just Lent in general and how Lent might map onto this astrology.
Mhm. Yeah, I think of Lent as a time of preparation and introspection, that originally was meant to mark preparation to if you were going to make this really big decision, which is to convert to Christianity, which in the early days of Christianity was a really big decision. It wasn't
Mhm.
like putting a white dress on a baby and sprinkling some water on their forehead. It was like you prepared for months, you learned the traditions, you learned the rituals, you weren't allowed to participate in them. You were stripped completely naked and held underwater as a way of really driving home on a ritual level. I'm ready to transform my life and the way that I live according to this set of beliefs and practices in this very new and emerging tradition. And so the callback in scripture felt sort of natural to talk about Jesus and his time as he was preparing to make this decision whether to move forward with this thing he was being called in to do, which becomes the Christianity that then all of these followers are using Lent to prepare for. So it kind of this his time of preparation in the wilderness where he makes the decision like, yes, I'm going to go forward and do this thing that I've discerned that I'm called to do, to map that on to this season for us. So a time of self-denial, a time of preparation, a time of looking inward and saying like, what's actually keeping me from this commitment? How have I fallen short? And how bold do I feel about making this commitment to this kind of way of life?
Whew. Talk about late Pisces, right? I mean, and this is something that we've talked about that's always so fascinating of Lent beginning in Pisces season, right? In the waters and in the sort of like preparation for a new way to let go, to sever and to also hope at the same time. And so when we were talking about this, when we were talking about all the planets in fall or in detriment, another word for that, for detriment is exile. And Sarah, you had mentioned that Lent really is a time of exile. And here we are in this month and this season marked by exile. And the passage that came to mind, which is kind of a go-to Lenten passage, is Jesus being tested in the wilderness in Matthew chapter 4. And I'm going to go ahead and read that to folks. And then, Sarah, maybe we can kind of apply this to both our political and personal moment and our astrological moment and faith moment that we're in. So this is chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, and I'm reading the New International Version. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. I'm reading this in a really new light right now in this moment, and I'm wondering what some of your kind of first thoughts are, Sarah, about this passage right now.
I'm thinking I'm thinking about how many people are losing their jobs, like very suddenly right now, and this is a conversation you and I were having earlier about like sometimes those of us who were raised Christian or in a Christian atmosphere or spent any time in Christianity, we're taught this sort of distorted message about temptation that we have this really evil side of us and that the devil is like appealing to this like terrible part of us and that we would indulge it by giving into temptation. But the story here is really clear that Jesus was like starving. It was his own discipline to do this, but he was starving. And being offered bread when you are starving, that's really, really different than like a trickstery guy who's like appealing to a deviant part of you. This is like when someone offers you a terrible deal on a car because they can see that you're desperate and you don't have a lot of resources. This is
Yes.
like predatory lending, like these kinds of practices, like preying on our vulnerabilities and insecurities. And I'm thinking about
Yes.
how many people in our country are now suddenly in a very precarious situation with their health care, with their employment, with their security, with their immigration status. These are the times where if something is offered to you, like these severance packages that we've heard are being offered to national employees, if you take this deal, it can feel really good in the short term because it feels like everything's being pulled out from under you. That's what temptation actually is. And I'm thinking about all of the people who are suffering under all different kinds of destruction around us, how tempting it might be to be offered a new place to live and start over, a really bad severance package. That feels like bread. That feels like turning the stones to bread. That feels like the opportunity to just like throw yourself off the mountain and trust that God's got you, and misunderstand that that's like preying on your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I agree. I think temptation has often been spun as this like personal moral shortcomings, often tied up around sex, where sex is really weaponized in this realm of temptation, right? And nothing about this passage is about sex. I mean, it really is about some of the most basic human needs, right? To eat
Yes.
and to have access to resources, right? Like, I'll give you the world if you worship me. Very tempting, right? Very, very tempting. And and then I think also there's an interesting piece of this too that I take as the temptation for ending one's own life, right? Or
Mhm.
the this it's interesting. It's hard. It may be read from an ancient point of view. It would be a little bit different, but from my kind of modern lens, I think the despair is really a temptation for me. The despair of the moment and the wouldn't it be easier if I just weren't here, right? Wouldn't
Yeah.
it be easier to just even if it's not a literal ending of one's own life, but a sort of even symbolic, right? What if
Mhm.
I just stick my head in the sand? What if I just tune out? What if I just pretend nothing's going on and don't really live in the moment, in
Mhm.
community, in relation with others? There is a sort of ending of one's own life in that. And God, it's hard to keep your hand in these moments,
Yes.
I think, especially when you're really being personally affected. Um eh, based on your own identity or systems that are targeting you. It's powerful to me. It reminds me that um, there can be purpose in my staying here, right? Whether that's literally physically staying here or being present to relation.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yes. It can be really hard to discern the difference between getting help from an unexpected place. I mean, the devil is, technically an angel of God, right? Who's been deployed on all different kinds of missions,
The
right? It can be
Satan, yeah.
really hard to know the difference between resources offered in a time of need from an unexpected place and taking a nap and giving up. Like those can all feel really similar.
Mm.
Checking out and taking a rest are not the same thing. And it's just not always easy to know. I guess I am, even though we're trying to avoid talking about Neptune too much, I just keep thinking about Neptune on this threshold and like just not
Completely.
knowing like how to discern which kind of decision is in front of us.
Which way to go, right? Which is, I think, to me, why it's so helpful to have a faith, to have tenets that we can refer back to in confusing moments of saying, these are the things that when I had a clear mind, decided were true for me and decided were right and good and holy for me.
Yeah.
And so that is what I'm going to return to in this moment where I'm the equivalent of as hungry as Jesus was after fasting for 40 days, right? And for many of us, there's an unintentional drying up of resources, which I think
Mhm.
thinking about planets in exile and how do we get the resources we need, it is much harder to behave ethically when our own needs are not met. And God, that is like that is the ultimate testing, right?
Yeah.
Is it's easy to do what you imagine to be the good and right thing when you're rested, when you're fed, when you're housed, when you have meaning, when you
Exactly.
have connection. But when those things are missing, or when the places that you're used to getting them are changing or drying up, whoo, it can be very easy to lose your way. And Lent, I think, interesting. I have a complicated relationship to the kind of self-deprivation practices, but I think, I don't know, I'm having a baby thought. I wonder what you think of it, of these practices of self-discipline actually kind of prepare us for the moments when the resources do dry up, right? And we are left to make choices in an under-resourced way.
That's exactly right. I mean, we can flash forward to Jesus preparing for crucifixion, which in our Lenten world is like the beginning of March to like just into April. And in Jesus's ministry, this kind of 3-year period where he's praying, like, I don't want to do this. Like, please, please don't make me do this. I think it's really obvious to call back to these wilderness moments where there's lots of options. You don't have to do it. You could do this. You could do this. I could give you all of this. You can avoid all this pain and suffering. This time of preparation was meant to make him strong. And it's the same for us. Like these times of discipline are meant to make us strong when we're not in times of abundance anymore.
Yeah. And I want to be clear to folks listening, at least, my personal theology is not that Jesus, like God needed Jesus to be crucified to satisfy some debt, but rather that Jesus needed to be in right relation with his community, which ultimately did lead to his death. And I think that, I mean, this is a debate that is long standing in the Christian tradition, but just in case people didn't even know that it was an option to think differently about the preparation for the crucifixion moment. I think that the crucifixion is really a result of Jesus's purpose of being in right relationship and teaching what right relationship looked like to the people around him.
Yes, me too. An act of solidarity that had to do with the way we show love by sticking together. And that doesn't always mean something rosy. Sometimes it looks like Venus and Aries. Sometimes it looks like major, major detriment or
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I do hope that we have a meaningful Lent. I do hope that we are able to sow peace where we might be tempted to sow violence. I hope that we all get through this as unscathed as possible these next months. But we have been looking at this time for a while and knowing
Mm-hmm.
that what we are moving into, Pisces and Aries season in particular, are going to be the most pivotal months of 2025 and are really going to, in all likelihood, set the stage for many years of action to follow. And so, I am here for one-on-one support for folks listening in consultation and accompaniment. And yeah, Sarah, I'm just really grateful to you always for your wisdom and your ability to hold space for, I mean, these are some difficult things and it's hard not to want to just keep it light. And I think we can still have fun and joy and all that, but I'm just always grateful for your partnership and in sort of talking about the hard and heavy thing and making astrology not just this or faith, right? Just this like bypassing kind of
Mm-hmm.
practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Let it be things that equip us and nurture us and sustain us for the very real life that we're committed to living.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that you would like to add? Final thoughts on the astrology of March? No.
Hang in there, everybody.
Hang in there. We're here. We're hanging in there with you. You are not alone. Reach out. And yeah, I saw a great meme this morning that maybe I'll end with. You don't have to wait until you feel good to do the things that are good for you. And
Mhm.
I think that might be a really good practice to move with in March. My first therapist used to say to me, I said, "Oh, well, I went running and I like ate some vegetables and I got some sleep and I still feel like shit," and she would say to me, "Now imagine how much worse you would feel if you hadn't done all of that."
Exactly.
And I was like, Sasha, you're still ringing in my ears a decade later.
Yeah, I put my exercise clothes on pretty much like at least halfway still asleep this morning, but it was like if I don't, I'll feel even worse. Like
Yeah,
the last thing I want to do is pull on binding clothing. I think it's the worst sounding activity, but I just do it before I'm even fully awake so that as I'm fully awake, I'm like, well, now I'm dressed. And so now here I go, here I'm going. And
totally.
I think that's good advice for these times is remember the things that help keep you grounded, help keep you whole, help keep you sane. You're going to need those, even if they don't feel like magic potions.
Completely. Completely. All right. Well, we will see ya all in a month. And yeah, Godspeed. Talk soon. Thank you, Sarah.
Yep. Talk to you later.